Playfulness should be regarded just as earnestly as healthy eating and exercise, says doctor and clinical researcher Anthony DeBenedit. This is the great paradox. Adult playfulness is actually serious business, and it needs to be valued and respected as such. To quote another doctor and clinical researcher, Stuart Brown, when we stop playing, we stop developing. And when that happens, the law of entropy takes over. Things fall apart, more plant than animal. When we stop playing, we start dying. End quote. Thing is, I don't know about you, but I don't really know a lot of people who think adult playfulness really is serious business, do you? If these social scientists are right, then why don't we treat play like a healthy virtue that it is, that's as key to keeping us alive as exercising? Is it true that play can grow your brain, or does it just numb your brain to mush? Can play help your social skills, or does it poison your relationships with selfishness and superficialness? Is play healthy? What does the clinical data have to say? Let's talk about it on our second episode of EXP. Hey guys, and welcome back to our second episode of EXP. In case you missed the first one, then just go back and check it out. On the first episode, we talked about why you should care about stuff like games, why it matters, especially from a Christian point of view, which is my point of view. But this is still pretty early on in the show, and so before we jump into more niche topics like sports versus video games, we want to hang out soaring up at 30,000 feet. We want to get more of a bird's eye view before we chat about specific ways to play. It's probably a good idea to ask, is play even good for you? Is it worth it? We're going to look at that in this episode from a health standpoint, whether play is good for you health-wise. And then in the next episode, we're going to think about that from a faith standpoint. Like, is play spiritually bad for you or good for you or neutral or what? But before we can click play and dive into the psych articles and the books, I've got to clear something up first. First off, we're going to intentionally stay pretty broad in this episode when talking about play. And that can get confusing for people. When someone says the word play, we could be thinking about anything in our minds, from soccer to casino slots to climbing trees to online MMOs to piano playing. And obviously, I can't offer blanket statements and suggest that anything and everything play related is healthy for you, or that anything and everything play related is bad for you either. It's just not that simple. But if we get lost in the weeds of definitions and subcategories on episode 2, then none of this is going to be that helpful. So here's my analogy for thinking about today's episode. It's kind of like asking, is food good for you? Do healthy people eat well? And there's two ways that you can answer that, right? You could say, well, some foods are definitely healthier for you than others. I mean, you can't just eat sticks of butter every day and call it nutritious. And do supplements count as food? And my uncle developed an allergy to bananas, so does that make bananas unhealthy? And blah, blah, blah. You could say all that, or you could just say, like, yeah, you need food to be healthy. Food is good for you, and healthy people eat well. So the same thing here with play. Like, is play good for you? Do healthy people play well? Most of this show is going to be the first way of answering that question, where we break down the ingredients label on modern play, where we try to process how to go to the play equivalent of the grocery store and sift through what you should put in your cart and what you don't want to at least start making intentional choices. But today's episode is about answering the question the second way and just saying, yeah, play is good for you. Healthy people play well. And in fact, if play isn't a part of your human experience, it's just not healthy. So don't rage quit on me if we're like 5 minutes in and your brain starts objecting, like, well, what about this scenario? Or what about the Hunger Games? Like, they were playing something in the Hunger Games, weren't they? And tons of people died. Like, okay, we're not here to talk about overeating or food poisoning. We're just talking about food, period, generally. You get what I'm saying. Okay, let's do it. Let's start to answer the question of whether play is healthy for you with some research and some data, some common sense, some careful thinking, and not just opinions that the internet shoves in your face like it's gospel. Here's how we're going to do it. First off, we got to explain what we really mean when we're talking about play, even if we're trying to keep this big picture and look at play in general, even if a hard-nosed dictionary definition of playfulness is really hard to pin down, even for scholars. We've still got to give your mind something to latch onto, some kind of common sense explanation without overcomplicating it. So doctors, scholars, smart people tend to take one of two approaches when explaining the benefits of play. And I'll use the two guys who I quoted in the intro as examples. So one approach is to talk about the behavior, like the act of play. And that is Stuart Brown's approach in his book, very creatively titled Play. Subtitle, How It Shapes the Brain, Opens the Imagination, and Invigorates the Soul. So better subtitle, right? Brown breaks down acts of play as the things we do that are purposeless, meaning done for their own sake, voluntary, with an inherent attraction to them, a feeling of freedom from time, a diminished consciousness of self, improvisational, and a drive to keep doing it. So that's one method to think about play. You just break down the activities. What does playing as a verb involve? Play is the stuff you do that feels like X, right? It's fun stuff you do for fun's sake. That's one method. The other method is to talk about the qualities of like a playful attitude or a playful approach to the things that you do. And this is Dr. Anthony DeBenedict's angle in his book, Playful Intelligence. DeBenedict compares two people, you and your Uncle Myron competing in a game of horseshoes in your backyard. And playfulness, he says on page 13, is an inclination to smile or laugh while you're doing it, unlike your Uncle Myron who takes it way too seriously. What makes something playful, he says, are the imagination, humor, spontaneity, sociability, and wonder that you approach something with. It's not necessarily just the activity. And in fact, the same activity can be miserable or playful to two different people depending on how they approach it, like the horseshoes example. So there's play as an activity and there's playfulness as a choice and an experience in an activity. Play as an event or play as an approach. And throughout this episode, while we're talking about the health benefits of play, if it helps to give you a handle to latch onto, you can think of either of these two ideas. If I quote some psych article about, I don't know, like what happens in your brain when you have a toy in your hands, you could think of what it was like playing horseshoes, the activity, or you could think of how you approached the horseshoes game differently from your Uncle Myron, poor guy. So I'm going to stop talking about Uncle Myron, and I'm going to start talking about 4 categories of healthy effects that come from play for children and for adults. So first up, cognitive health, your brain, your thoughts. What we typically associate with intelligence, right? Your smarts. Is play a way to grow your cognitive health? The low-hanging fruit for this gets brought up in like the justification for aging folks doing crosswords and word games, right? Like, I'm going to play Wordle and then I won't get dementia. And there's some general data to support that. Like, that's not silly. Brown says in his book that, quote, there are studies that show a relationship between continued use of puzzles, playful exercises, games, and other forms of play, and resistance to neurodegenerative diseases. And he also says, quote, one study done at Albert Einstein and Syracuse universities showed that for people who had the most cognitive activity, like doing puzzles, the chances of getting Alzheimer's disease were 63% lower than that of the general population. But the problem is, that's usually where we stop in our connection between play and your brain's health. And it's really just scratching the surface. As I was doing research to prep for this, just the week before, TED Ed, which is like an educational branch of TED Talks, put out new content about some of the history of the Montessori school system and how it's actually a very recent educational trend to separate play from learning in boxed out segments like recess. It was actually only when Prussia banned kindergarten that this forced separation appeared, so the video claimed. Pretty sure students for a long time before then had to sit down for classes without having free range to run around and sing songs at whims. But you get what they're saying. For most of history, play was learning for children as they imitated what the adults in their life were doing, and the adults had a chance to talk through it with them in a safe and a loving environment. When you play, your natural curiosity drives you to explore the assumptions you have. You know, maybe it's the assumptions about like what kind of boat contraptions are going to float. And your play drives you to explore how one subject translates into another one. So play, in other words, it's less like a bonus dessert that maybe has some brain boost sprinkled in there. And it's more like the engine behind learning and cognitive health. It's an engine that works better than the standardized test cramming performance metrics where people walk out into the workforce with half-cheated degrees, but not real learning or lifestyles of cognitive growth. Now, this is not an episode about educational models, so I'm not going to dive much further in on the school stuff than that. Our kids personally have been in Montessori schools. They've also been in hybrid models where there's homeschool a little bit and classical school and more general principle about the power of play for your brain's health. First, she starts out talking about, how action games and racing games can lead to, quote, improved visual attention and spatial intelligence skills, which predict higher achievement in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, faster, more accurate decision making, in high stress, time sensitive contexts, improved ability to track multiple streams of information simultaneously, up to 3 times as much information as infrequent game play, more efficient neural processing. She goes on to talk about the benefits of strategy games and which improve concrete problem solving skills. And she talks about the effects of games on people's creativity tests and storytelling, and on it goes. But you can find a lot of studies that say a lot of things. What really interested me was when she compared the scientific evidence of how much quote unquote brain training games were improving cognitive function compared to just regular old video games like Portal and World of Warcraft. And what neuroscientists discovered was the regular old games improved cognitive performance significantly better than brain training games. Because the regular old games were just harder. They were more interesting. They were more complex. There's a range of different things you're doing. And so why am I bringing that up? If you can get over the whole video game health thing, because that's not the hill I'm trying to die on, my point is, it was more of a free range playing the regular old video games that really improved cognitive function as opposed to the focused brain training games. Why? Well, if play is a bonus dessert that maybe has some sprinkles of brain boosting themes mixed in, then it would make sense for the brain training games to work the best. You would have to hijack play with an in-your-face educational component for it to actually have any brain benefits. But if play is the engine, the most helpful source and motivator for cognitive growth, then it would make sense that more engaging play experiences actually improve your cognitive functions more than limited play experiences advertising themselves as educational. I feel like I'm getting really wordy here, but do you see what I'm saying? Like, just like I'm not a child developmental psychologist, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I am a game developer. And so I wanted to try to bring in my own experience here, my own field, to add something to the conversation besides just lots of quotes from other people. I experienced some of these cognitive development questions in research when I was developing WordMingle, which is a hybrid physical and digital word game. One of the things that I focus a lot on in the big pitch video for the game is having these tactile letter tiles that you move around in front of you. The game's better for your brain because of that physical component. And that's true. That was part of the hope of making that word game, that it's kind of like a fun, healthy habit. It's brain food. But the other big part of why I think Word Mingle is good for people who like word games, that I really only barely had a sentence about in the video because, the attention span of the internet, is basically like, hey, just have fun with something new. Like, the hope with Word Mingle was not that players would switch their daily allegiance away from the New York Times to my own website and ritualistically play for the rest of their lives on autopilot, as mundanely as they brush their teeth. The hope was for your brain to grow, you should play with new games, like new ways of mixing letters together. See how you get better at it every day over the course of like a month. Try it with friends. Try the harder difficulty. And if in 3 months that customer is on to playing some other new word game and forgot about Word Mingle, I'm totally okay with that. Like, that's the power of play, to keep your brain itching for more ways to explore and reconsider. The brain that plays is adapting, it's expanding its connections, it's seeking out new connections, it's enjoying its own growth. Think of how well you know that subject from high school that you hated and had to complete to pass the tests and get the grade. And now think of how well you know the ins and outs of that hobby that you're passionate about. Play is an essential aspect of a kid's neurological development, and play is a well-tested strategy for helping the elderly age with healthy brains. We've already talked about both ends, right? So why do we think that everything related to play in the middle is somehow immature and embarrassing if it's not textbook studying or the means to some kind of career networking end? And I'll close out this category with another quote from Dr. Brown, that the brain can keep developing long after we leave adolescence, and play promotes that growth. We are designed to be lifelong players, built to benefit from play at any age. As we play, we continue to change and adapt into old age. Understanding why animals stop playing in adulthood and why humans don't helps us further understand the role that play has in adult life. All right, let's try to cover more ground. We could probably talk about any one of these categories of the health benefits of play forever, but I want to give just enough of the data and the common sense to sort of convince you of the general point. I'll go a little quicker now. Play is healthy, yes, cognitively, but now let me also say socially. So Dr. DeBenedit spends a while talking about the themes of playful sociability in one of his chapters, and eventually he gets to the point where he stops and he asks, okay, so what benefit does this actually have? If this is what it looks like for you to be playful, and one of the answers he gives is that playful characteristics are socially likable characteristics. DeBenedit talks a lot about how being playful is the opposite of taking yourself too seriously. And who enjoys spending time with people who have no humor? Like, no wonder, no spontaneity. I'm not talking about personality. I'm talking about your social values. Like, play is a part of our social lives. It doesn't mean you're always the guy trying to pull out Pokemon cards in the break room over lunch while someone's talking to you about their mother's funeral. It means, to use DeBenedict's words, you have a lightness to you in a serious world, in a good way. Right? He uses the example of a guy who moves into a high crime neighborhood who plays pickup basketball with the neighborhood. And then people start to like him. They call him P-Dog. And the kids try to get him to tutor them, right? Imagine how your relationship with this intimidating higher up in your company changes when you're playing street basketball with them and their shirt is stained with sweat and they're not the best player, right? Same thing wouldn't happen if they just invited you to dinner. Why? Because basketball is magical? No. And not just because I'm bad at basketball. Because when you play, you're communicating like, hey, I'm a human. I can fail. I can let you win. I can look dumb. And I can find value in things other than the stock market and business meetings. And that connects us, right? Assuming you're not like the person on the court who acts like they're Michael Jordan and shows off your bad character through play instead. See how much I'm not a basketball guy? The only reference to basketball that I knew was to mention Michael Jordan. Okay, back to the point. If you don't play, you aren't a playful, social person in terms of like character qualities, not gross qualities. Your social intelligence and your social life suffers. That doesn't mean you have to play basketball, but it does mean that families that only talk about the stock market aren't going to have deep relationships and healthy connections, right? Remember earlier how I was talking about that TED Ed video on models of education and the Montessori history. They mention how a 2023 study showed the play-focused Montessori schools not only outperforming traditional schools in language and math, but also in social skills. Brown talks about how play is a relational catalyst, not a relational distraction. He says, quote, "Those who simply spend more time together don't necessarily start getting along better, particularly if one or both privately consider spending time together a duty. People have to keep growing, keep exploring new territory in themselves and each other. In short, they have to play. If we continue to play together, we will always be able to find emotional closeness, always be able to find novelty and make discoveries not only about those we love, but also about ourselves." All right, we've talked about the cognitive health benefits of play, the social health benefits of play. Let's move on and talk about the adaptability and innovation that comes with play and how it can grow our health in those areas. Now, why am I bringing up adaptability and innovation? You might think that's just kind of a cognitive thing, but here's what I'm envisioning. I'm kind of picturing this listener right now, or someone watching this right now being like, okay, I kind of get how play is good for your brain, how it keeps you from being a jerk or something, and I want to keep my marriage playful, sure, whatever, but I'm pretty into my job, and I don't think monkey bars or checkers are going to give me a promotion within my rocket science job. If I'm going to improve my health or performance or success somehow, it's got to be through the textbook studying that you just poo-pooed a few minutes ago, not through playing around. A funny thing, you should mention rocket science, imaginary dissenter, because this was one of my favorite stories from Stuart Brown's book. I promise I read a lot more books than just these two. They just seem relevant for these categories. He talks about employees from Caltech's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which practically invented the space age. But once a new generation of employees started taking position at the Jet Propulsion Lab, the company was struggling. What happened was the younger employees had great theoretical knowledge. They had great educational degrees. But unlike the older employees, they couldn't move complicated projects from theory into reality. And so for the company, JPL, they were trying to figure out why. What should we look for in younger employees? How do we weed this out? They did a bunch of studies, and they found that, quote, in their youth, their older problem-solving employees had taken apart clocks to see how they worked, or they made soapbox derby racers, or they built hi-fi stereos or fixed appliances. The young engineering school graduates who had also done these things, who played with their hands, were adept at the kinds of problem-solving that management sought out. Those who hadn't generally were not. From that point on, JPL made questions about applicants' youthful projects and play a standard part of the interviews. Now, let me just give a couple more quotes from Brown, because I think he's good at this topic. He says, quote, "If we stop playing, we share the fate of all animals that grow out of play. Our behavior becomes fixed. We are not interested in new and different things. We find fewer opportunities to take pleasure in the world around us." One more quote. "There is a great deal of evidence that the road to mastery of any subject is guided by play. Learning a subject by rote can take one only so far. To become a master, the pupil has to go beyond what is known, has to learn what has not been shown by others in the field." So are you the person hearing this thinking, I'm not trying to make more friends or play word games, I just want to do better at the stuff I'm doing? Well, play is a necessary part of that healthy category of development too. Again, we're talking about play broadly here. Play around with the recipes, play around with the design, play around with the musical instrument. If play isn't a part of your life, if your play muscles are atrophied, your adaptability and your innovation and make it happen skills are going to atrophy too. Okay, so is play healthy? Cognitively, yep. Socially, yep. For like your skills and adaptability and innovation, yep. I'm going to skip over the insane power of physical play for your physical health because remember, terrible at basketball. But that one's like almost a no-brainer. Let's talk about one more category of healthy benefits that come from play before we offer some pushback in the conclusion. Remember how I mentioned Dr. Jane McGonigal earlier on? By the way, this was just a book to prop up the effect at the visual at the beginning. It's a Hebrew dictionary. I did read the other ones though. So Dr. Jane McGonigal, remember how I mentioned her and I said, oh, we're going to come back to her. Well, here we are coming back to her. Okay. The first time I came across Jane McGonigal's story was years and years ago, while I was still kind of simmering on all these questions that I had about play and my vocation as a pastor and my life as a healthy person and so forth. I had found this series on YouTube called Extra Credits. Took me a while to find who it was. It was a long time ago when I'd seen it. They had a variety of videos related to gaming, but one series in particular that I saw was a playlist called Because Games Matter. And it was supposed to be about how amazing video games were and how useful and healthy and helpful and good for society and on and on. But I'll be honest, like for most of the videos that I watched in that series, I was completely unconvinced. I wanted to see something there, but for every story that they shared, I felt like you could have swapped the word video game for basket weaving and it would have made no difference. Like English teacher connects with shy student through shared love of basket weaving. Hospitalized children find comfort and distraction in basket weaving to improve their recovery. Boy finds emotional relief through basket weaving while his mother goes through cancer. And I'm not trying to belittle the real help that, video games were in those scenarios. I just didn't find a convincing argument for why video games carried any sort of inherent value over other things. Like I didn't see in those stories any reason to believe that video games were like this helpful healing medium for the world. Basket weaving might have done a better job of that in a lot of those cases. I don't know. All these videos about video games being amazing were not convincing to me. None of them showed me how video games were better or unique in improving people's lives, except for one. Jane the Concussion Slayer, it was called. And that was where I learned about Dr. McGonigal's story, which is also in her book here with a lot more interesting stuff like what I quoted earlier. So Dr. Brown, Dr. Benedict are doctors because they have MDs. They're medical doctors. Dr. McGonigal is a doctor because she has a PhD, research. And what's fascinating is how she encountered the medical health impact of play from a completely different direction than those other guys. Jane McGonigal had already become the first to get a PhD studying the psychological advantages of gaming and how that helps in the real world. She'd been studying and writing for a while already, but then something happened. She got a horrible concussion, so bad that she could hardly get out of bed to the point of suicidal thoughts. And then a month later, the thought occurred to her. She said, quote, I am either going to kill myself or I'm going to turn this into a game. And this became not only a turning point in her own recovery, but also what she became famous for, this program of sorts that she made that aims at thinking of your life as a game. People often call this kind of thing gamification. She's not the only person who's thought about this or talked about it, but she has a very famous TED Talk about it too. The program she made is called Super Better, which is also the title of the book. But she first called the game Jane the Concussion Slayer because it was just for her. Essentially what she did was she reframed her approach to the challenges in her life in terms of like the terms and expectations of the video games that she studied. She recruited allies, like her husband. She identified the bad guys, like her mental fog. She completed quests. She was aiming for these epic wins. She was leveling up physical and emotional resilience. You get the idea. This was something that I was so fascinated by because you couldn't just swap whatever she was talking about for basket weaving. This was about the core qualities of play actually improving the rest of people's lives instead of distracting from them. McGonigal says, quote, being gameful means bringing the psychological strengths you naturally display when you play games, like optimism, creativity, courage, and determination, to your real life. It means having the curiosity and openness to play with different strategies to discover what works best. It means building up the resilience to tackle tougher and tougher challenges with greater and greater success. What makes Jane McGonigal's method so interesting isn't just that she came up with a way to turn life into a game, or games into your life, or however you want to look at it. Plenty of people have been doing that for a long time. What's so convincing about McGonigal's Super Better program is that she leans so hard into nerdy game ideas and terms, and that she has an insane amount of respectable scientific studies and research to back up the real health effects that it's having. We live in a world where everyone is claiming that their life hack is like this groundbreaking scientific truth. Like, I bet you saw some kind of YouTube ad pop up right before viewing this that was like, this is what bananas are actually doing to your arteries. You know, genetically modified pumpkin seeds are going to improve your lifespan by 350 years. Or like, there's one guy who did one thing once and it worked for him, so now he deserves 40 million views. Like, he's the expert. What I respect about McGonigal and find refreshing with her work is that she didn't do that. She didn't just say, hey, I did this fun thing, making my life into a game, and it worked for me, so you should do it too. She's like, yeah, and I also had controlled studies conducted by the University of Pennsylvania and clinical trials from the National Institutes of Health confirm hundreds of thousands of data points to show how this clinically improved people's emotional health and recovery. So what do you take from that, right? Because we don't have time to unpack her 425 pages, even though it'd be super interesting and on point. I'm not actually trying to talk about video games here on this episode, which comes with a mixed bag of health effects. Even though McGonigal was all sold out on the idea, I'm trying to talk about play. We've already talked about how you can think of play as an approach and not just an activity. But McGonigal takes it a step further. Something that play can do, it doesn't only shape moments in your life, it can help shape your life mindset in ways that are scientifically shown to reduce symptoms of depression and anxiety, improve your confidence, strengthen family relationships, and so on. People talk all the time about how they want their kids to be in sports because how it positively shapes their outlook on life, their cooperation, their achievement, hard work, and all that is a great example of play's positive impact because sports are a form of play. But McGonigal's story shows that the importance of play in your life outlook goes beyond just high school volleyball. This sense that there are challenges to be conquered, that there are allies to make, that there are worlds to be explored, and taking that into your real life, your real circumstances, is such a gift to your health instead of an escape from it. And if we choose to play intentionally, if we choose to be playful in the best of ways, if we choose to adopt the best parts of our play experiences into the other parts of our life that need growth, then man, it's hard not to call that extremely healthy. All right, I know it seems like we've been cramming a ton into one episode. Trust me, I had to trim out a lot to keep the topic from getting too out of hand. I really wanted to talk about Neil Postman's famous book on amusing ourselves to death, who has a pretty different perspective on what happens to education and our approach to life when we have to make everything a form of entertainment. What makes the difference? When does it stop being healthy? When does it start becoming an attack on the seriousness of life and serious thinking? We're going to have to save his book for another day. I think it could deserve its own episode anyway. But it's worth letting all these different authors have a voice while we process the complicated effects of play in our lives from a health standpoint. Even if we can see generally that the answer is yes, it's healthy, we can't allow ourselves to turn generally into always or absolutely. We have to name the mixed bags where we see them. We have to tread carefully, knowing how powerfully play wires us and shapes us. This episode was intentionally broad so that we can take in the like essential health benefits of play in people's lives without getting sidetracked by all the what ifs or negative scenarios, especially since there's so much stigma surrounding game culture and play culture. It was worth zooming out. It was worth just saying, hey, let's just get board games and video games out of the brain for a second. Let's just think about play as a whole. Because when we do that, the better question is, how healthy is it not to play? That's the scary part for me. But I do want to land the plane, bringing the subject back to the focus of the show, which is specifically modern forms of play, like board games and video games. And I want to close out with another book, Good Game, No Rematch, A Life Made of Video Games. This is not a doctor of one form or another. This is made by a comedian, Mike Drucker. Now, I'll be honest, there was not a lot of deep reflections on life and play in this book. It was mostly just hilarious. But in a weird sort of way, it was an important way of making this whole conversation more meaningful, more personal, seeing play and the story of a man who views his life as something that was made of video games. Being a kid myself who grew up around Toys R Us and Kids Cuisine and played Super Mario 64 at my piano teacher's house while waiting for lessons, being all in on video games, I understood the stories he was telling. These games were more than just games. They were like a part of our childhood, our experiences, our memories. And was it all healthy with a joystick under our thumbs? Well, I'm not comfortable saying that. This is not that kind of show where we just talk up modern play like it's all fun and amazing and we ignore all the negative consequences. I read Drucker's book and there's a lot of sadness in it. Like the recommendations on the cover even admit the sad tone amidst all the humor and the family situations. But even the parts that weren't supposed to be sad were kind of sad to me. Like in his recent life, Drucker talks about a really sad story of his friend dying. And in her last days, they just talked about video games that they liked. And maybe there was more, and he was just trying to stay on the theme of the book, but the connection, even in the face of death, didn't go beyond playing with things. And the book's final chapter is Drucker rebuilding in his home during COVID his own version of the arcade that he grew up going to as a kid by himself. And the last words are, quote, "I had my own miniature arcade. The world was mine." I mean, he's not dead or anything. Those are just the last words of the book. But still, it's like the dude's autobiography. And I think what he was going for here was, surrounding himself with the memories and life moments that marked his story. The games that he grew up with, the arcade where he hung out, some deeper meaning and all that. But something about the conclusion being this grasp for a nostalgic flashback of constant video games, now alone in his home as an adult, felt much more hollow to me than triumphant, almost haunting. That the finale of a life made of video games was a life of just video games. And here's the thing though, just like I can't get myself to look at that kind of life of modern play and say that's healthy, I can't really get myself to look at his entire life story and think, oh, those games were all just garbage either. His life story of video games is filled with these really beautiful moments, like how the creator of the King's Quest computer games, Roberta Williams, inspired him to write stories, how he and his sister and dad were all caught up with the wonder when the first Super Mario came out and it felt like a world of magic, how he tried to impress his high school crush with Dance Dance Revolution and started a secret club for it in the storage closet of his programming class. And you might say what I said earlier about those extra credit episodes, that there's nothing magical about games here, that you could substitute PlayStation with pony rides and have the same effect in someone's life. But for one thing, like, how far are you going to go with that logic? When should you ever watch a movie when you could be having a Bible trivia night instead because it's quote unquote a better alternative? And even more than that, I'm not sure it's even true here. I'm not sure you could just swap pony rides for PlayStations and get the same life story with those meaningful moments. Maybe a novel could inspire a kid to want to write, but Mike Drucker already talked about how much he liked to read. It was the immersive experience of King's Quest that inspired him more. I don't think his 7-year-old sister and bitter father could have been given like a hamster or a balloon or a TV show and had the same kind of shared excitement that the NES sparked for both of them in the same moment. And he most definitely would not have attempted anything resembling fake dancing if it were not for being a quirky arcade game. I can remember moments like that. I grew up addicted to video games, and I regret it. I wouldn't relive that if I had the choice. I mean, I hardly ever play games today, which I know sounds kind of crazy from a good game designer, making the show. I wouldn't trade the things that fill my life now for another MMO RPG to get sucked into from my early teens. Yet I'm not ready to say that every part of those games were all bad for me all the time. Part of the reason I have these little boxy Paper Mario dioramas on my desk and why I love that series so much is because I have these strong memories of me and my cousin and my brother all sitting around playing Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door on the GameCube. And we never did that stuff, all three of us together, that we all legitimately enjoyed. The closest thing was we're all the cousins and us all played Nerf guns, which always turned into everyone ganging up on my brother and making him miserable until it wasn't fun to destroy him with foam sticks anymore. And love you, Jake. Sorry about the Nerf guns. Point is play healthy for you in general? Absolutely. I think that should be talked about. That should be embraced, understood by literally everybody. How can you hear all that data and history, the research, the human experience, and not just see that part of how we're made? Play is good. It's healthy. It's good for your cognitive health. It's good for your social development. It's good for your mastery of your skills, your job performance. It's good for your resilience, your resolve, and healing. Even if we need to be careful about turning our own entertainment into this deceptive God, it's still good. It's still healthy generally. But now, what about modern forms of play? What happens to food being good for you when you add in all these other ingredients? When does it become junk food? When does it become junk play? If play is healthy, what about screens? What about entire make-believe worlds to escape into with alter egos making us hate our crappy, boring job even more? What do? How do we know what it's doing to us? When you see a mix of those haunting, sad consequences and those beautiful, charming stories all in the same autobiography about a life made of video games. And that question, instead of just being a little soundbite add-on that we answer quickly at the end of one episode, is actually what's driving so much of this show. That question is a mainline quest, not a little extra optional piece of lore. How do we leverage the best of what modern play offers while being able to spot the bad ingredients and make our own recipes? How do we pursue all this differently if we're coming to it with Christian values or if we're not? How can we shape play and even board games and video games knowing what we know about health and play? How can we shape it to be something filled with even more meaningful moments and deep connection and wonder and growth and creativity and community without it leaving us hollow and turned in on ourselves, grasping for these nostalgic moments of childhood escape in our final chapters? And if you really want to know those kinds of answers, so do I. That's why I love what I get to do with EXP, to process and explore this and create a community around it. So live a playful life, have a playful mind for your own health, for your own Alzheimer's prevention, for your own job success. But come back and join us on the next episode and the next one to process with me what that looks like, to do that well in a world of games today. See you then.